Hello everyone and welcome back to Monday Mids episode 16. Not much new to report or talk about, and I am not going to talk just for the sake of it. With that being said, I humbly request that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. It will help me decide whether or not to accept my videos being banned in certain regions to keep clips in. Alright, with the begging out of the way, the image on screen explains the premise of this series, so pause and give it a once over if you are new here. Let's get right into it. Today we pulled J, and initially I wanted to cheat and skip it because I remember the mids in this section being devoid of options I would actually want to showcase. But thankfully I was somewhat mistaken. Right off the bat, I will let you know I will not showcase JoJo or JJK in the bangers category. JoJo should already be known by all, and JJK is scamming people with good animation to cover up a barely functional story. But that's enough about that. Let's get to the bangers first. This week, we actually had several certified bangers, but most of them all fall under the same banner of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Not all installments of the series hit the 8 and higher mark, but most of them do. So if you don't want to watch it at this point in the game, that's your business. I won't try to convince you. I won't spend much time getting into it, but I'm fairly confident the majority of anime watchers past, present, and future would enjoy these series and rate them higher than mids. The first series is Jigokuraku, a supernatural action-adventure series. The English name is Hell's Paradise, and it follows Gabimaru the Hollow, a deadly ninja sentenced to execution who discovers that, despite claiming he has nothing left to live for, his love for his wife is keeping him alive. He's offered one chance at freedom: travel to the mysterious island of Shinsekyo and retrieve the legendary Elixir of Life in exchange for a full pardon. Joined by other death row criminals and their executioners, Gabimaru quickly discovers that the island is far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Combining brutal action, supernatural horror, mystery, and surprisingly emotional character development, Hell's Paradise turns a deadly survival mission into a fascinating exploration of life, death, and what makes someone worth living for. This show hits all of the things I like in a series. There's mystery, there are supernatural elements, there's fighting, the animation is good, there are historical elements, there are samurai and ninja, and most of all, this series does not try to inhabit that gray area between younger and mature audiences. It unapologetically leans into the darker and grittier tone with the violence and fights. The second series is Juuni Kokuki, an action-adventure fantasy series. In English, it's known as The 12 Kingdoms, and it follows Yoko, a quiet high school student who has spent her life trying to fit in and meet everyone else's expectations. Her ordinary existence is shattered when a mysterious man named Kage appears, declares that she belongs on the throne of another kingdom, and transports her to a completely unfamiliar world. Separated from Kage and stranded alongside two classmates, Yoko is forced to survive in a land filled with strange creatures, political turmoil, and constant danger. What begins as a classic journey into another world develops into a rich fantasy about identity, leadership, personal growth, and discovering the strength to choose your own path. Granted, this series is 23 years old at this point, so it's not the newest and cleanest animation you are used to at this stage in the game, but it still holds up, and its art style stands out more now that all art styles seem to be going in the same direction. It honestly baffles me that this series doesn't get more attention and love, as I had to find it by literally watching every entry in an entire genre on Mal. But it was worth a deep dive into that category to find it. The third series is Kage, an action, comedy, fantasy series. It's known in English as The Eminence in Shadow, and it follows Sid, a young man obsessed with becoming the mysterious mastermind who secretly controls events from behind the scenes. After being reincarnated into a fantasy world filled with magic, he finally gets the opportunity to live out that dream. Calling himself Shadow, Sid creates an organization known as Shadow Garden and invents an evil cult for them to secretly fight. There's just one problem. The cult of Diablos actually exists, and Sid has absolutely no idea. Blending overpowered action, ridiculous misunderstandings, and surprisingly deep world building, The Eminence in Shadow is a hilarious parody of fantasy and isekai tropes that still manages to deliver when it takes the action seriously. Honestly, this series is just straight hilarious. It does not take itself seriously, and it just does as it pleases. This actually works out more often than not, hence why it's in this category. You can go from absolute comedy to a top-tier animated scene almost within the same frame. I am pretty sure the only people that don't like this series are the people looking for something straightforward and serious. Now that brings us to the mid-series that we will cover today. Now let's be clear about one thing right off the rip. If you are an overly serious person and you need your series to be equally as serious, this is not for you. This series is the epitome of light-hearted fun, bordering on absurd when you really think about the premise. With that warning out of the way, it does a surprisingly good job of making an inanimate object personable enough to create some moving scenes. Today I bring you Jidou Hanbaiki. This series follows an unnamed vending machine fanatic who dies in a freak accident involving, you guessed it, a vending machine. Rather than reincarnating as a legendary hero, powerful monster, or gifted mage, he awakens in another world as an actual vending machine. Unable to move independently or communicate normally, he can initially speak only using pre-recorded vending machine phrases. He eventually meets Lammis, an incredibly strong but somewhat clumsy young hunter who discovers him in the wilderness. She names him Boxxo, and thanks to her enormous strength, begins carrying him around on her back. Together, Boxxo and Lammis travel through a massive dungeon filled with settlements, monsters, adventurers, and increasingly strange problems, all of which Boxxo attempts to solve using the surprisingly versatile abilities of a magical vending machine. This is where the show's ridiculous premise becomes surprisingly creative. Boxxo earns points when customers purchase products from him. Those points function as both currency for acquiring abilities and the resource that keeps him functioning. He can spend them to unlock new functions and vending machine forms. More importantly, he can generally reproduce vending machine products and functions he was familiar with during his human life. That gives the writers an excuse to introduce an enormous variety of machines and products. Boxxo's inventory can therefore provide things such as food, drinks, hot meals, ice, hygiene products, emergency supplies, and other specialized items. Different situations effectively become puzzles. What type of vending machine could solve this problem? And the answer is frequently much stranger than expected. I want you to keep in mind that we're not talking about Western vending machines here. Japan has a startling and enormous variety of vending machines that some people have never even seen or heard of. So this show actually has a lot of creativity that might be going over your head when you initially think about vending machines. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a parody isekai, a ridiculous reincarnation gimmick, and comedy built around a vending machine. And to some extent, that's absolutely what it is. But underneath the joke are a few surprisingly sincere ideas. First, finding value despite your limitations. Boxxo has some enormous disadvantages. He can't walk, he can't fight normally, he can't freely speak, and he doesn't even have a human body. Instead of magically eliminating those restrictions immediately, much of the series revolves around working within them. Boxxo becomes valuable because he discovers what he can accomplish rather than constantly lamenting what he cannot. Number 2. Creativity over raw power. This is probably the show's most entertaining concept. Boxxo isn't solving every problem by firing an enormous magical attack. Instead, he asks, what can a vending machine provide that would help here? His knowledge of vending machines becomes his equivalent of an overpowered cheat ability. That means his victories often depend upon preparation, observation, product knowledge, and improvisation. It's an inherently silly concept that the series takes surprisingly seriously. Number 3. Community and usefulness. Boxxo gradually becomes an important part of the dungeon settlement. People don't value him simply because he's powerful. They value him because he makes their lives better. He feeds people, provides useful supplies, supports adventurers, helps businesses, and protects his friends. There's a surprisingly wholesome idea underneath everything. Being useful to the people around you can give your life meaning, regardless of what form that life takes. Here are some of the top reasons people liked it. The premise is genuinely original. We've had protagonists reincarnated as slimes, swords, spiders, and monsters. But an actual vending machine, that's difficult to forget. The show understands how absurd its premise is and has fun with it. It really commits to the vending machine gimmick. The writers don't simply turn Boxxo into a human after an episode and abandon the premise. His limitations matter, and the series finds increasingly bizarre ways to turn actual vending machine concepts into useful fantasy abilities. That's where much of its charm comes from. Boxxo and Lammis. Their relationship is extremely wholesome. Rather than building the entire series around romantic tension, their partnership is primarily based on trust, friendship, mutual dependence, and genuine affection. Lammis needs Boxxo just as much as Boxxo needs Lammis. It has a surprisingly comfortable atmosphere. Despite dungeon monsters and occasional serious threats, much of the series has a relaxed feeling. It's partly isekai adventure, slice of life, and comedy, which makes it considerably lighter than many fantasy series. In the interest of fairness, as always, here are the top reasons why people disliked it. The big gimmick can wear thin. This is inevitably the biggest problem. If you don't find how is the vending machine going to solve this problem entertaining, there isn't necessarily enough underneath the premise to keep you invested. It also has limited protagonist interaction. Boxxo's communication restrictions are central to the premise, but they can also become frustrating. Other characters must interpret his limited responses, which restricts how naturally he can participate in conversations. The characters are relatively simple. The supporting cast is likable, but the anime isn't particularly focused on complicated character development. Many characters have straightforward motivations, easily identifiable personalities, and simple relationships. That works for the show's light-hearted approach, but can leave the cast feeling shallow compared with more character-driven fantasy anime. It also has low dramatic tension. Because the series prioritizes creativity and comedy, many dangerous situations ultimately become another opportunity for Boxxo to unveil an unusual solution. That can make serious encounters feel less threatening. It just occurs to me that this is the first time I'm actually saying the English name for the title, but a simple way to describe Reborn as a vending machine I now wander the dungeon is An absurd but surprisingly wholesome isekai about a vending machine fanatic reincarnated as the object he loved, who must use product knowledge, creativity, and an incredibly strong companion to survive life inside a fantasy dungeon. What distinguishes it from many gimmick isekai is that it actually commits to the gimmick. Boxxo doesn't simply become a conventional overpowered fantasy hero wearing vending machine aesthetics. His inability to move, restricted communication, reliance on customers, and unusual functions remain fundamental to how the story operates. That makes it considerably more creative than its ridiculous title initially suggests. The premise sounds like something created as a joke, but the series manages to turn that joke into a genuinely charming fantasy adventure. Getting to the plot rating, this ends up being a 7 out of 10. The premise seems absurd at first, but they actually make it work pretty consistently. They commit to it instead of trying to transition away from the reason people stayed to watch in the first place. This is more good than bad in my opinion, as the show is pretty creative in terms of executing the plot. The inherent limitations of making one of your main characters an inanimate object that is both static in terms of movement and larger development is why this score ends up being in the 7 range. Regarding the characters, they end up being a 7 out of 10. This score is handicapped by the fact one of the pivotal characters is literally a vending machine. Despite that handicap, it still does a better than average job regarding relationships and interactions. It's actually ridiculous that they can produce emotional moments when the character in the scene is literally a vending machine. It had me questioning whether I had lost my mind at some points, but it's actually pretty well done given the framework it has imposed on itself. Moving on to the animation aspect, I gave it a 7 out of 10. It has good clean drawings and animation, which is basically the industry standard at this point. There are some action scenes as other characters do fight, but remember the co-main character is a vending machine, so you can't exactly expect to see Mappa fight scene levels here. Overall, just a solid above average job on display here. The overall score ends up being a 6 out of 10. This is another one of those scores that makes you wonder how the hell this ends up being a 6 when it received 7s across the board. However, the answer is quite simple. Despite all of the things it does well, the series is inherently limited by virtue of its own design. It can feel like one of those shows that run endlessly without the world state or plot truly developing towards some kind of goal. It's basically a slow life anime without directly branding itself slow life. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Love you all. Stay safe, stay beautiful. Peace.